I judge myself based on the triangle aspect. So you have the triangle that is exactly like this, and then in reverse. So when you have the two together, they constitute actually the lines and the architect of the portrait. So once the face fits inside, it makes my judgment easily. And that's the first thing I look at. And also, it doesn't matter of the medium of the work. It's also how once again, the lights and the shadows are respected. It doesn't matter if it's a pointillism or surrealistic piece. I think those first rule of a portrait still play a big role.
And I think we were pleasantly surprised by the different mediums that artists experimented with, that they tried out. I could see that a lot of artists try to push themselves to think about different mediums. So that is, I think, something that would be nice to look out for, to see how it might be a little different to what we think a portrait might be. Consider the whole. Everything needs to serve a purpose. So if you bring in a certain type of material, why do you bring it in? There has to be a reason almost for that. So often a medium can also add to the message that you give as the artist. So they have to serve one another. The technique, the material, the medium, how it's presented, who is painted, all of that.
I think judging is a process of dialogue, and the debate this year was rigorous. Before I came, I made some notes of things that I would not like to see rise to the top. I think historically the award has tended to reward facility and maybe work that, let's say in the medium of oil, that has a facility in representing a subject almost photographically. And skill, the spectacle of skill is always impressive, but for me is not enough. One thing that's interesting, which you don't see in looking at the pictures, is the 51-year age gap between the youngest artist, the winner, and the oldest artist, who I think placed third. Again, that wasn't an intention, but it's heartening to see that ageism isn't an issue.
The first medium that came to mind is the broderie. I think South Africa is quite big in that medium, and also one of the winner I think is in that category. So I think that's one of the medium I would like to push especially young artists, not necessarily to do the same, but to use mediums that are unconventional.
We did see a broader range than I understand was in past years. So there were textile-based medium. There was really interesting, if drawing is not a medium, it's an action. So there was oil pastel, there was pastel, there was gouache, there was graphite, pencil. So, even in the textile, there was quite a range. There was, I think, crocheting was one work. We also had, there was a knitted work.
I think one of the issues that we artists face in order to be selected is they tend to move away from the subject, which is the subject obviously. So the background becomes too busy and it disrupts the judges to focus on the work itself. Now you look at the whole picture because you force us now to judge based on the artwork in general instead of the portrait.
My only advice to anyone entering the award is to pay attention to what you want out of your career. I can't give advice on technique or subject. Those are things that are particular to every artist. If you need to brush up on your technique, well, then brush up on it. But be true to yourself in submitting a work. I know you can submit multiple works, and if we use a musical analogy, don't submit one ballad, one sort of dance song, and a funeral track. Think of what is if you're always going to play to the audience, you're going to get caught in that trap. What you want is a sustainable career. And that's not true just to someone who's 23. Even if you are 40 or 60 and picking up and exploring portraiture, you still have a long career ahead of you. Do things that you can look back on and feel that they helped you grow as an artist. And then totally separate to that, don't enter the award and make a work 3 days before the closing time. Wet paint shows, incomplete composition show. We saw some entries with the pupils missing and, little details that was like, okay, they entered this at midnight.
For me, a portrait is the face first. Without the face, there is no portrait.
I think it's a very basic human impulse to be interested in other humans. And that will endure as long as we're more than one. You're a portraiture award, but also in a very traditional sense, not new media. And by that I mean photography and video. So what you're asking for, it's implicit in the award, is interpretation. And I think that is always interesting. How do people interpret other people at a particular moment in time? I think how we interpret ourselves now in 2025 will be different in 2 years' time. One of the things that I noticed, and there were many themes in the work submitted, but one is the relationship of the human to the screen. So there were a number of photographs of either like a screen reflecting in someone's face, or more literally a portrait of someone looking at a phone or looking at some technological object. So there's clearly, it's an anxiety. Maybe it will pass. Maybe the next award will just be flooded by even more. But you can see that relationship of the portrait and the artist as interpreter of a kind of zeitgeist or time. And in that sense, I think a portrait award will always be relevant, and it will always somehow touch on themes, some eternal, beauty, sadness, birth, aging, all these that you are very familiar with. They sort of have a tidal quality. But then other things that are very more sort of particular to the time.
The winning work this year it has so many different aspects that stands out. It's always important to look for the mastery of a medium, right? So any medium you choose, just to show that you can master that medium, and this artist has done that. But then more than that, this artist also challenged the idea of what a portrait can be and can look like. So we think of a portrait as an image of a body, a part of a body, right? And this work actually fractures that idea slightly by almost displaying the face as an object, and then also as a broken object. So in the way that the face is broken in the artwork as well, it's not the way that a face would be broken. It's a way that pottery would be broken, perhaps. It's a layer of meaning. It's complex. It keeps your attention. It was also a gamble for the artist, obviously, to try something that's a little different. And they executed it very well, which is what we want. We want fresh ideas, perfectly executed.
I think this is the first time, from what I've heard, that drawing piece is actually the winner of the competition. Not only because it's drawing, it's also because the artist pushed the boundary of drawing. Key elements for me as an artist that constitute a portrait is the light, the shadow, and the clair-obscur, which is the in-between the two. And he executes very, very, very well. It's sculptural. So the artist moved the medium beyond just the material, the materiality of the execution, but more to the shape and the form of the subject. So it's become more sculptural rather than just a portrait or a drawing piece.
There's very clearly great skill and facility. The artist can clearly draw, but they also brought something more. it's an incomplete portrait. It's a generic portrait, you could argue. It's a portrait of a young man, but you can't really tell his identity, and it invites speculation. There's a number of qualities that I was drawn to, and those are amongst them. After 5 days, it was one of the works that just kept being returned to.
The portrait itself is well executed. There were other portraits that were in the same kind of feel, but what made it stand out is the environment where the artist put the portrait in. The work talk about the subjects in an environment that become hostile to his community. So that plays a big role.
And it's also not fully realistic. It is, but there are some certain elements in it which is quite interesting. So you'll notice that the edges of the person is very intentionally distorted. For me, that means that the artist has sort of a reluctance and to sort of keep within borders. And I find that quite exciting when you consider the concept and the narrative behind the portrait as well. So the way I see this portrait is that the person that is depicted was someone very important in the fight about land, about District 6. You can see Constitutional Street, and we know about the history in South Africa. So the artist selected a contemporary issue. They're talking to something that is still happening, that's still unresolved. The person that is depicted, the portrait, is perfectly executed. In the history of portraiture, we have people who depict or pay artists to make portraits of themselves so that they can hang it in their houses, so the main patrons of a certain area. Also important people, that people are considered important in certain contexts, in certain cultures, are always also through history depicted, right? And I think what's important in our time is that has changed, and it should change. And I think this is why this is such a powerful portrait as well. It's a narrative portrait, but it's not a conventional narrative portrait. The artists had taken liberties, also again gambled a bit on what to do, thought a bit out of the box, and it paid off.
The second place work, to me, seems to reflect on the role of photography in seeing the figures holding a photograph. It's sensitively treated, I think, as a work. But, there's the social or political aspect of the work, but there's also how artists look and what they use as source material. It strikes me that this was probably based off a photograph. So it's a nice little conceit to have the subject also holding a photograph in his hand.
Our third choice is the pointillism. And for me, that work is very striking. It has a very complex background, if you think about it. It has a very busy background. It's the background draws your attention. And in some cases, we found throughout the selection process that when a background is overworked, too complex, too bright, and sort of, it can take away from the portrait. But in this case, it doesn't. In this case, there's a perfect synergy. And somehow, without the background and the intricacy of the background, the work wouldn't have been that strong. So this works perfectly. There's a consideration of what is in the background, the colors, the way it's executed, the composition of it. And the technique is excellent. It's just a lovely, striking work.
The third prize winner is an interesting melding of two things, which is obviously the female subject, who from the title we take must be named Robin, and then this rich sort of caped floral abundance around her. Since after the judging and we were given the names of all the winners, I did a bit of Googling, and I was very surprised to learn that he is chiefly a botanical artist. I didn't see any figure works. So that's surprising, and I hope it encourages the artist to perhaps consider pursuing the figure more. We had a lot of entries where there was very clearly an attempt to make a decorative background. It is a portrait award, but you also want to see the figure in their context. It's not necessarily that you have to do that, but some artists struggled, and you see that they paid more attention to the decorative background than the figure in front. Whereas I think in this work, you see a successful integration of the figure and the background.
Our fourth place is our other drawing. This artist is so focused on detail. It's a ballpoint pen, and it's not an easy medium to work with, but they do it so well. It's considered in the lighting, you know, like how the light touches one's skin, the composition of the figure, the way the figure sits within the overall design of the work, even the small little details of the bees around it. If you look closer, it is very impressive to be able to do that in such detail on such a small scale. When you look at realistic portraiture, you can have like a photorealism where it's almost like a snapshot of a person and you can reproduce that. But what's happened here is that there's a sense of an interpretation from the artist's side, right? So it's not, even though maybe this person did sit as a subject for the artist decided how to position this person. There is a sense of design even in the facial expression of the person. There's a sense of interpretation, which is important. It's emotive, you know, like you feel something when you look at it as well.
As a judge, you walk in and and you do rounds of judging, and there's works placed on the wall and you consider them. And some works, just when you walk in, wow, and you don't spend much time with them in the sense of trying to persuade yourself or persuade the other judges. Other works, there was heated argument, but a work like this, I think everyone agreed the artist is technically accomplished, and the fact that it's a blue ballpoint pen is also kind of unique.
And our fifth work is an embroidery work, which I'm very excited about. As a medium, it has many possibilities. Working with thread, working with needles, it's a lot that you can do. It's a lot you can say about the method itself, also like what happens when one uses a needle through fabric. You know, in some instances people can say there's a sense of violence in that as well. It is very impressive how the artist has mastered their medium and how they've captured that person in a specific moment. But then more than that, they've changed it between how the face was portrayed and how the rest of the bust was portrayed. So very abstract, you have soft lines, you have threads falling, and that could be a tricky thing to do, to both be able to do very realistic portrayal and do something that is quite abstract. It gives an interesting contrast in the work, and there's a softness also in the way that the threads hang. And then another element is the fabric that is used. I believe, I don't know, but I believe it is possibly the handkerchief of the person that is portrayed, like something that is used. And there are many of them that are connected together if you look through them. And some of them you can see are a bit more dirty. They've been used for quite some time. So I don't know, like they have a piece of that person in that material already. And for me, that makes the portrait stronger as well.
The way it's executed and the material the artists use, which we look at it looks like the old handkerchief. So that's really, really bold for an artist to use as a material, because the medium itself is historical.
My grandmother would be proud of me for choosing this. And iconographic things, you know, materiality is such an important part of being an artist. And part of it is mastering materiality, but part of it's also looking at the range of techniques available. And this work seemed to match skill with an idea of innovative presentation. And I liked the let's call it maybe distressed textile or patchwork textile, in which this very sensitive portrait sort of sits. Textile can be a conceptual medium. You know, I might have started by joking that my grandmother, but I think if one travels around the world, you'll see that some of the most innovative work at the moment, and the work that's generating the most interest in biennales, art fairs, galleries, is textile-based work. So I think it's important that it's also seen as a valid, it's not just tokenistic, it's a strong work in which the action of embroidery, or the technique rather, is matched by ambition and a kind of conceptual approach.
The drawing medal, it is just so impressive to see someone work in that medium to such perfection. And I think from afar it might look like a photorealist work, like it is just a copy of almost a photo translated. It's not. The artists show that they can do it, but there is again a sense of interpretation, a sense of elements added by the artists themselves. So if you look closer, and for me it was the first obvious sign of it was in the hairline and in the forehead. If you look at the lines used, the lines from the skin sort of folds into the hairline and becomes a little pattern that they've created around the nose as well. And that is not how a person naturally looks, and it doesn't disturb the artwork at all. It doesn't take away from the realistic version of the person. It adds to it. It shows that there are some consideration. You know, someone thought about how to add this signature to this work, how to show that they did this. Also, just composition, stance, the facial expression, the way it's portrayed, all of it works very well, even the color of the background. So sometimes I enjoy a background with some detail. I do. I think it can add, especially in a narrative version, it can add greatly to a portrait. But in this case, it would have distracted. Because there are so subtle details in that artwork, it would have taken away from the portrait. And so the background and the color of it, again, works perfectly, and it's very exciting to see someone push that medium so far.
It will sound obvious when I say this, but one of the benefits of in-person judging in a world that is increasingly digitized is that things shift when you see a material object in person. In the early phases of judging, we look at digital reproductions of work. That particular work looks like a photograph when you see it on a screen. It's not a category here, photography. So I was curious to see it. When I came in initially, I was like, gosh, that looks like a photograph, you know, from a distance. But when you come up close, the image almost, it doesn't dematerialize, but you see the parts that make it up. And it's a bit like a sort of, if you see a pixelated image up close, you just see the dots that make it. When you step further away, it gains a coherence. And there were a number of artists who attempted, let's say, that magic trick, and unfortunately failed spectacularly. This was the complete opposite. I think, you know, there's very clearly high skill. But when you went up close, you saw how this work was sort of magically composed. As I understand, it's a self-portrait based on a younger image, I don't know, 10, 20 years ago. And I didn't know that going in, because often the titles are not always statements of fact. Sometimes they're kind of poetic. So, you know, you have to kind of navigate your own way through these things. But in learning that it was a self-portrait, and this was after having chosen it, it was interesting just in terms of the pose. You know, it's not a frontal portrait. It's a young man looking over his shoulder. There's an attitude there. It's not aggressive, it's just an attitude. And I think it's captured that attitude, which, you know, it invites multiple readings. You know, you could say he's surly, you could say he's moody, you could just say he's just looking backwards.
I think what I'm excited about in the top 5 is that They're each very different. They each stand on their own, have a complete different way of doing portraiture. They show that you can do portraits, a very successful portrait in a different way. And I think that is very important for both artists to realize, and also for our public to see that portraiture can be so many things, and it's a very exciting genre.